Cain's wife. The oldest mystery in Genesis, finally investigated.
The first murder in human history is recorded in the book of Genesis. Cain kills his brother Abel. He is cursed, exiled, and forced to wander the earth. But just a few verses later, the Bible quietly says something that has puzzled readers for centuries. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived. And that raises one of the most difficult questions in the entire book of Genesis. If Adam and Eve were the first humans and Abel had just died, who exactly was Cain's wife? Was there another group of humans already living outside the garden? Did the biblical story skip an entire civilization? Or is there something hidden in the ancient text that most readers completely miss? Tonight, we investigate one of the oldest mysteries in biblical history. Few questions in the Bible have generated as much debate as this one. Skeptics often present it as a contradiction. Believers sometimes avoid the topic entirely. And across centuries, theologians, historians, and biblical scholars have proposed many different explanations. But when we approach the story like investigators, carefully examining language, historical context, and the structure of Genesis, a fascinating pattern begins to emerge. The mystery of Cain's wife may not be a missing piece in the Bible. Instead, it may reveal something about how ancient texts communicate history. To uncover the answer, we must examine the clues hidden inside the early chapters of Genesis.
The paradox hook.
Let's begin with the central paradox. In Genesis chapter 4, Cain murders his brother Abel. Afterward, he is sent away from the presence of God. Then the narrative continues in Genesis 4:16-17. Then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and lived in the land of Nod. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived. The story moves forward as if nothing unusual has happened. But modern readers immediately notice the problem. Up to this point, Genesis has only introduced 4 individuals: Adam, Eve, Cain. Abel is now dead. So the obvious question appears: where did Cain's wife come from? This single line has led to countless theories. The phrasing implies a deeper prophecy, but the symbols suggest an alternate reading. Perhaps it's a deliberate ambiguity. Others suggest the Bible may have omitted important details. Some imagine another human civilization outside Eden. But before jumping to dramatic conclusions, a biblical detective asks a more careful question. What does the text itself actually reveal about the early human population?
Common misconceptions.
Many misunderstandings come from the way modern readers imagine the timeline of Genesis. We often picture the story unfolding quickly, almost like scenes in a film. Adam and Eve have 2 sons. A conflict occurs.
You took what was mine. I had no choice. There's always a choice.
One brother kills the other. And shortly afterward, Cain leaves and starts a new life. But Genesis was written using ancient narrative compression. Large spans of time can pass within just a few verses. One key detail appears later in the text. In Genesis 5:4, it says, "After Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters." This statement suggests something important. Adam and Eve did not have only 3 sons. According to the narrative, they had many children over many centuries. Genesis describes Adam living 930 years. Within the framework of the biblical story, that lifespan allows an enormous amount of time for population growth. So by the time Cain left his family, there may already have been many descendants of Adam and Eve. From this perspective, Cain's wife may not be mysterious at all. She may have been a sister, niece, or close relative from the early generations of humanity. However, that explanation introduces another question modern readers often raise. Wouldn't that mean the earliest humans married within the same family?
The context key.
To understand this issue, scholars often examine three contextual clues. These clues help interpret many ancient passages in Genesis. 1. Linguistic context. The Hebrew word used in Genesis for wife is isha. It simply means a woman joined in marriage. The text does not specify where she came from or describe her background. The silence here is telling.
Indeed, they must have known. Their assumptions are clear in the text.
This silence suggests the original audience likely already assumed the answer. Ancient readers familiar with the genealogy of Genesis would expect early humanity to come from a single family line. 2. Cultural context. In the earliest stages of human population, within the biblical narrative, there were no nations, tribes, or unrelated families. Human society consisted entirely of the descendants of Adam and Eve. If the command in Genesis 1:28 to be fruitful and multiply was to be fulfilled, the earliest generations would inevitably marry within that extended family network. Many theologians view this as a temporary situation unique to the earliest chapters of human history. This passage is key, unique to the beginning. Later in biblical law, particularly in Leviticus 18, marriage between close relatives is clearly prohibited. But those laws appear much later in the biblical timeline. 3. Narrative context. Genesis does not aim to document every birth or generation in detail. Instead, it highlights individuals important to the theological story. This means many family members may exist in the background without being named. When Cain takes a wife, the text simply assumes her presence. To the original audience, the explanation likely seemed straightforward. And the word of the Lord came to me, saying, "Hear the words of this covenant." But there is still another puzzle hidden in the story.
The aha moment.
After Cain receives his punishment, he expresses fear. In Genesis 4:14, Cain says, "Whoever finds me will kill me." At first glance, this statement seems strange. If only a few people existed, who exactly was Cain afraid of? But when we consider the possibility that decades had passed since Cain's birth, the situation changes dramatically. If Adam and Eve had numerous children and grandchildren during that time, the early human population could already be growing. Cain's fear may not refer to unknown tribes or hidden civilizations. Instead, he may have feared revenge from members of his own extended family. The mark placed upon Cain, mentioned later in the same passage, can be interpreted by many theologians as a symbolic protection within the narrative. Cain's wife likely came from the same expanding human family described in Genesis. The story simply does not pause to explain it.
The life application.
When we step back from the mystery, the narrative reveals something deeper than a genealogical puzzle. The story of Cain represents the first fracture within the human family. According to the biblical narrative, humanity begins as a single household. But almost immediately, conflict appears. Jealousy leads to violence. Violence leads to exile. And exile leads to the spread of human civilization. In Genesis 4, Cain eventually builds a city and names it after his son Enoch. This moment symbolizes the beginning of organized human society in the biblical storyline. What began as a family tragedy becomes the starting point of human culture.
Many theologians interpret this progression as a reflection of humanity's complex moral journey.
Civilization grows. But it grows out of a broken story. So the question, who was Cain's wife, may not be the central mystery after all. The deeper revelation lies in how Genesis portrays the origins of humanity. Within the biblical narrative, all people share a single ancestry. The story emphasizes that humanity begins as one family. This idea carries profound implications. Conflict within that family leads to the earliest acts of violence. Yet the narrative continues to trace humanity's history from that shared origin. In this sense, the mystery of Cain's wife highlights something foundational about the Genesis story. It presents humanity as interconnected from the very beginning. Many biblical scholars emphasize that difficult passages often invite readers to explore the text more carefully. Questions like the identity of Cain's wife encourage deeper engagement with history, language, and interpretation. Rather than weakening the story, these questions often reveal the richness of the biblical narrative tradition. Within that tradition, Genesis explores themes that remain relevant today: family relationships, moral responsibility, and the consequences of human choices. The story reminds readers that the earliest conflict recorded in Scripture occurs between brothers. It suggests that the greatest challenges facing humanity often begin close to home.
The mystery of Cain's wife has sparked curiosity for generations.
And while the Bible does not provide a direct answer, the clues within Genesis point toward a logical explanation.
But the story leaves us with a deeper question. If the earliest chapters of Genesis portray humanity as one shared family,
What does that mean for how we see each other today?
perhaps the ancient narrative is not only about the distant past.
Perhaps it is also asking us to reconsider something about the present.
Because sometimes, the oldest stories in human history still have the power to challenge how we understand our own.
Because sometimes, the oldest stories in human history still have the power to challenge how we understand our own.